This Presta valve has problems. As you can see, the tip is bent, but never fear. You can bend it back with your fingers. Then you can pump up your new tire, unscrew the pump head, and promptly let all the air out because the valve core is stuck in the pump head. Yes, Presta valves suck, but what are you gonna do about it? Install a Schrader valve on your high-end mountain bike? Well, yes. Actually, many people are more than happy to drill out high-end rims to fit a wider, more durable Schrader valve so they don't have to deal with Presta. Yet, Schrader valves are usually only found on low-end bikes like this beach cruiser. And then you see Presta on real bicycles, including most any mountain bike over $1,000. But why? Well, I installed 4 different valves on this one wheel so we can answer that question. We'll talk about the 3 other options, including this valve, which has some mountain bikers salty and divided. Indeed, this could be a pre-mortem on the Presta valve, but before we start hurting people's feelings, let's start with a quick anatomy lesson. This is a Presta valve stem. This is the valve foot. And this is the lock ring or rim nut that holds the stem in place. This is the valve core, which screws into the stem like so. At the top of the valve core is the top nut, which is threaded onto the plunger or shaft. When a Presta valve is installed on a wheel with an inflated tire, you can unscrew this top nut and the pressure in the tire will keep it seated. Then, when you push it, you can bleed air from the tire. And that same mechanism allows the air pressure from a pump to automatically open the valve during inflation. Presta valves can be found on inner tubes and as standalone units for tubeless tires. You can even inflate a Presta valve with a Schrader pump by using an adapter. This all seems pretty clever actually. It might even be genius, so what's the problem? Well, now we can get into how Presta became the standard for mountain bikes, and that goes all the way back to the late 1800s when a French inventor by the name of Schrader brought it to reality. At the time, pneumatic tires were kind of a new thing, and so were the valves. The Dunlop or Woods valve had already been invented, as well as the Schrader valve. But at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, Schrader won an award for the design of the Presta valve, as well as the pump he designed to inflate it. For bicycles, the Presta valve had a few advantages. First of all, it was a little bit lighter, and it was a little bit narrower. As time went on, Presta valves became the preferable option for bicycles, especially road bikes that had narrow rims, because the Presta valve had a smaller diameter than the Schrader or Woods valve. It also happened to weigh less, and it was more effective at holding high pressure, which became increasingly important. And Schrader's company later became a major brand, Zafal, which further embedded the standard in cycling. So because of these small advantages and the fact that Presta valves were perfect for high pressure road bike tires, we have a century-sized stockpile of wheels and pumps built on the Presta standard. But after World War II, Schrader valves, the kind you use on your car, became extremely common on leisure bicycles, children's bicycles, and cruisers. They were widely available, and you could inflate them at the gas station or with any pump that you would use at home. And so the divide was created. Leisure bicycles used Schrader valves, and serious bicycles used Presta valves. And then along came mountain bikes. Truth be told, the earliest mountain bikes used Schrader valves because they were based on beach cruisers, but as purpose-built, high-end mountain bikes came out, they were fitted with Presta valves just like road bikes, despite having a completely different use case. Mountain bikes have wider rims, they run lower tire pressure, and they encounter flying rocks and twigs, and receive all sorts of abuse that can damage the valve. Today's mountain bikes use the same valves as French track bikes did in the 1930s. But is there really anything wrong with that? I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Well, when mountain bikes first came out, Presta valves didn't make the most sense, but as time went on, they made even less sense. So let's talk about exactly why Presta valves suck so much for mountain biking. First of all, this shaft, it gets bent all the time, especially if you accidentally leave the valve open. And that's another thing, this is the only valve you can accidentally leave open, and this pesky shaft ends up being vulnerable to getting hit with something or leakage. There are also additional steps to using a Presta valve. After you remove the valve cap, you also have to loosen the top nut, and if you're wearing gloves, it can actually be kind of tricky, especially if it's cold out and you're wearing heavy gloves. And then as you turn that top nut, you end up bleeding a little bit of air out by accident. And so these issues compound to make Presta valves much slower to use. That's really bad in a race situation, but that's not the only way that they're slow. It's actually slow to pump air into. Now, that must not have seemed slow because, well, this is from an air compressor, but it's pretty slow compared to other valve types, and actually, a lot of people remove these cores in order to seat tubeless tires. Now, it is true that several brands make high airflow Presta valves, which we will touch on later. But let's talk about inflation for a moment. Now, as you know, this little tip has to be loosened in order to inflate a Presta valve, but once you've done that, it's a lot like Schrader. You can thread a pump head onto it. If you're using an air chuck like this, you can just push it on and hold it there, and then other pump heads actually lock on with a little lever. All of them kind of suck in my opinion, and I'll tell you why. It's because messing around with pump heads is usually what ends up bending this little tip right here. And if you thread it on your pump head occasionally, it'll unscrew with the valve core. I personally make sure I secure my valve cores extra tight so that doesn't happen, but it does happen to the best of us. Oftentimes, you'll be inflating a tire fitted with a Presta valve and you can't get air into it. You're standing on the pump, you're putting all your body weight into it, and little tiny trickles of air are going into the tire. Now, sometimes that's because there's a sealant clog, but more often, you just gotta mess around with the pump head until it starts working because this little nut guy is stuck to the side of the head or the shaft is bent. It's hard to be consistent with a Presta valve. But at the end of the day, these little valve cores are cheap and easy to replace, and any problem you would have with a Presta valve is probably simple enough for even a beginner to fix. And so we just deal with it. But you know who doesn't deal with it? Fox, RockShox, and every other suspension manufacturer on planet Earth. To my knowledge, all bicycle air suspension uses Schrader because that seal is more secure when you thread it on, and the stem is a lot more durable. On suspension, there are more time-consuming and costly consequences associated with valve failure. You don't want to unscrew your shock pump and have the core come out and shoot fork oil everywhere. And it's interesting that the original benefit of Presta was the ability to hold high pressure. That doesn't seem to matter anymore because most mountain bike rear shocks hold more pressure than any road bike tire ever would. And it's all done with a Schrader valve. I understand that suspension is a different use case than tires, but some competitive racers drill out their wheels to fit wider, more durable Schrader valves. Jones Bicycles converted their entire line to Schrader. Stands miles wide and many other manufacturers even sell tubeless Schrader valves, alongside premium Presta valves, and so it's the same market looking for something better. I used tubeless Schrader valves during a Walmart bike project, and they're pretty hassle-free. I might even consider doing it on one of my main bikes. Not to mention the valve stem is actually wider and more durable. And like Presta valves, the core can be replaced or removed and cleaned if it gets gunked up with sealant. For mountain biking, there's no wonder that some people, even at high levels, choose to run Schrader. But for those looking for a lower commitment alternative, there are several premium Presta valves available. Stands, Muck-Off, Reserve, and others seem to acknowledge that Presta valves can be improved. And so there are premium options, usually costing about $50 a pair. These Reserve Fillmore valves are actually much better than typical Presta valves. The airflow is better, and they seal themselves off from sealant at the valve foot. Not only that, but there's nothing to unscrew at the top except for the valve cap, and that's the one downside. If you forget to put this valve cap on, dirt can get inside the valve stem. Oh, you also can't really replace the valve core if something does happen to it, and if you need to buy a new one, they're pretty expensive. There are other brands with similar solutions with similar pros and cons, but if you're still using traditional Presta valves, there are actually several benefits to them, which we'll discuss, just to be fair. Of course, Presta valves are super easy to bleed air from since you can depress the tip with your finger. I guess that's kind of cool. It's also true that if you have really narrow rims like you would on a road bike, Presta might be your only option because of its diameter. But that's not going to help you on a mountain bike. Originally, Presta valves were used on road bikes because of that diameter and the fact that they're really good at maintaining high pressure. But as we discussed, that was only true a long time ago, and mountain bike tires are not high pressure anyway. But it's definitely true that you can inflate a Presta valve with a Schrader pump by using a small adapter that you could leave on your wheel. And to my knowledge, there aren't any elegant solutions the other way around. Another benefit of Presta valves is that they're lightweight. for what it's worth. And although they do make special wrenches for changing Presta valve cores, you can actually use just about anything to accomplish this, including pliers or oftentimes your valve cap. By comparison, a Schrader valve has a core that's buried inside the valve stem, and so you need a special tool to turn it. And so I guess Presta valves aren't all that bad, huh? But as we've been discussing, there are other valve standards like Schrader, but also these two. This is a Dunlop or Woods valve designed by C.H. Woods for some of the very first mass market pneumatic bicycle tires in the late 1800s. In many European and Asian markets, these are common and even predominant, but globally, they're found on less than 10% of bicycles. Here in the Americas, Dunlop valves are almost unheard of, yet a Dunlop valve body fits almost the same rim hole as Schrader. Oddly enough, you can inflate a Dunlop valve with a Presta pump or anything that kind of fits on it. There's no pin, air is allowed to go in but not out. It's that simple. Now, because of the valve body diameter and pressure limitations, these are only used on utility bicycles and commuter bikes. They're also not tubeless friendly, making them a poor choice for most mountain bikes. And then there's one more option, maybe the only other mass market valve standard, which is the Clik valve. These were only brought to market recently, and the timing is pretty bad. Culturally, mountain bikers seem weary of new products, especially ones that make things more complicated or trap them in some new ecosystem. And not only is Clik patented and backed by a big tire company, Schwalbe, it's actually a new standard, not just a new Presta valve. When mountain bikers hear that, their saltiness levels go way up. Now, I'm not affiliated with Clik or Schwalbe, who backs it, but this is actually pretty compelling. First of all, as of this moment, Clik valves are significantly cheaper than any premium Presta valve alternative, especially if you just buy the cores, which are compatible with all Presta stems. So, for $12, you can change out your cores, and they don't actually require tools to install. You can just do it with your fingers. Clik valves just look like this all the time, whether they're opened or closed. There's no top nut. Like Schrader, Clik uses a pin to release air, but like Dunlop and Presta valves, they will open if you force air into them using a Presta pump head. The catch is that you may not get accurate pressure readings if you just use a Presta valve head. For that, you need a Clik pump head or an adapter. And if you have a dual pump head like I do, you can just leave the adapter on the Schrader side, and then you can see what I find so compelling. You just push the head onto the valve and it stays in place. There's no top nut to unscrew, and you can't leave it open accidentally. You don't need to hold the pump head on, flip a lever, or thread it. And because there's no threading, you can't accidentally unscrew your valve core when removing the pump head. There's no protruding tip to bend. It's easy to use with gloves, and if the valve core needs replacement, you can do it without tools. Even the valve cap just pops on and off, although I don't know how well that is going to stay on. But it is true that the diameter of a Clik valve stem is the same as Presta, making it equally as vulnerable in that regard. They say if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but in this case, they actually went and fixed something that was broken. To me, Clik is kind of like the USB-C of valves. You might need a dongle at first, but someday we're gonna be better off. But what am I gonna do? One thing is for sure, any one of these valves is more reliable than installing all four on your rim. Surprisingly, I was able to get this tire to seat and hold air without any sealant, and it continues doing that for about 17.5 minutes. On my cross-country bike, I have installed Clik valve cores, and I'll be testing them long term. All my Presta CO2 heads are gonna continue working with this, and I have an adapter installed on a pump so I can check the pressure accurately. I also wouldn't write off Schrader just yet. These are nice and stout, and they can take a lot of damage, and they seem to be making a bit of a comeback. I would consider using Schrader on my next build. But other than that, meh. Nothing I do with bicycles is really mission critical. I'm not racing for money. I'm not using a bike to actually commute to work. And so I'll just keep a whole bunch of valves on a whole bunch of different bikes and see which ones I'm drawn to naturally. I can inflate any valve in my shop, and even when I'm out on the trail, I can pretty much inflate any valve, and so it just doesn't bother me. Now, what I don't expect to see is Clik killing off Presta. Not anytime soon, probably not in my lifetime. These have been around for over a century, as well as Woods and Schrader, and they haven't gone anywhere. And if you think mountain bikers are resistant to new things, you haven't met a road biker. Nobody wants a bent shaft, unless that's what you're into, and although I do think Presta valves are probably the worst part on your entire bike, I'm actually not passionate about that opinion. I'm just a nerd who wanted to rant to his friends about bicycle valves. So I hope you learned something today, and if you didn't, I hope you at least found this video entertaining. Thanks for riding with me today, and I'll see you next time.